Cult. When you hear the word cult, do your ears perk up? Of course you've heard of Jim Jones, David Koresh, Heaven's Gate, and NXIVM, but today you won't hear about any of those usual suspects. No ma'am. Today we are going to talk about the ones that oftentimes go unmentioned. But just because they don't all have a body count larger than an OnlyFans model, doesn't mean that they aren't dangerous or destructive. Come with me and let's explore some obscure cults that you probably never heard of before today. The way that I formatted this iceberg is that we're going to start off with things that are kind of strange and benign, but still unsettling in how quirky and weird they are. From there, we're going to descend into the depths until we reach the more dark and terrible at the end. And spoiler, the last entry on this list is so bad, I cannot believe that I had never heard of it before researching this. I think everyone should know about it. But keep in mind as we go that things are going to get worse all the way down to the last entry. Before we get there, let me just say this on a slightly more somber note. At the end of the day, each entry on this list is dark in its own way. These are all real people whose lives were forever changed as they were indoctrinated and either decided to or were forced to do terrible things. Viewers' discretion is advised. This is purely for educational and entertainment purposes. And with that, I won't waste any more time. Let's kick things off with the first entry on the iceberg. The Brethren. The Brethren, otherwise known as the Garbage Eaters, were a cult that was founded in 1971 by Jimmy T. Roberts. Jimmy believed that the world was far too materialistic and therefore corrupt in the eyes of God. Much like Sodom and Gomorrah, God was fixed and ready to clear the slate. Him and his followers believed they needed to take a step towards a stricter way of life in order to appease God. Using his anti-materialism stance, they turned towards a more nomadic approach, which struck home during the end of the counterculture movement, where the younger generation wanted to escape the mundane norms created by their parents. With this, he was able to amass a congregation of 100 to 150 mostly college-age followers. His following moved from place to place, scavenging and living a survivalist lifestyle around the US. When I say scavenging, I truly mean scrounging. Jimmy also forbid his group from mixing with outsiders who he labeled as agents of Satan. This often meant that his followers would creep about in the middle of the night and look for discarded food in dumpsters and trash cans throughout the surrounding areas, which is where they got their nickname from the media, the Garbage Eaters. Although Roberts died in 2015, the group remains active, and the tunic-clad group still roams around the US, except now they're led by a council. Happy Science. Happy Science is one of the larger groups on this list that swallowed up approximately 30,000 souls in a New Age movement from Japan that was centered around their leader, Ryuo Okawa, beginning in 1986. Okawa, a former businessman, took a page out of L. Ron Hubbard's playbook and must have thought the best way to make money was by starting a religion. The main difference being that his claims of spirituality are even wilder than Scientology. You see, Okawa did not claim to be an extraterrestrial god, Jesus, or even a fictional new savior. He was all of these things wrapped up in one. He claimed that he was the incarnation of figures such as Buddha, Hermes, Einstein, Jesus, Cleopatra, and even Yoda, to name a few. He taught his followers that there were 4 principles to enlightenment: love, wisdom, self-reflection, and progress. But there should have been 5 principles on his list, because what Okawa seemed to prize most was money. Happy Science is an interesting cult because what they focus on most is what I call a cult pyramid scheme of sorts. The organization has its own media empire. They produce anime films and media using their leader Okawa as a main character, who often vanquishes villains or demons in an attempt to indoctrinate the youth of Japan. Also, you can find them printing many books and pamphlets, all depicting much of the same as well as his teachings. His followers must buy these books or watch his sermons to glean the message of salvation that he has to offer, which in turn racks up millions for the cult and its leader. In addition to that, during the 2020 pandemic, the group began selling spiritual vaccines that would heal anything from the common cold, coronavirus, depression, or even reset your karma debt. During this time, there's no way to know how many of his followers died due to untreated illness as they leaned into the group, turning to false alternative healing that actually just padded Okawa's pockets. On another fun note, here on Happy Science, apparently they were at odds with another much more infamous Japanese cult that you may have heard of, Aum Shinrikyo. At one point, Aum tried to assassinate Okawa, but failed, though it was hardly talked about in the media and probably overshadowed by some of the more terrible acts like the sarin gas attacks committed by Aum. The Congregation for the Light. The Congregation for the Light, or as they call themselves, the Light, is a small and extremely secretive group primarily located in New York. The group was created sometime in the 1960s and currently is headed up by a man named Tom Baer, though he did not found the group. While doing research for this video, it appears that there have been at least 3 different leaders throughout the last 30 years. However, I don't know any information on how they elect their leaders due to their reclusive nature. They do not have source material or openly fraternize with members outside the group, who they call know-nots. What we do know about the group comes from ex-members who claim that their belief system is more of a word of mouth, oftentimes coming from generation to generation. The group's beliefs are that their followers all descend from a master Aryan race that hails from Atlantis. They claim to be on a mission to live happy, healthy, and sane lives, where they are responsible for their own actions. And that takes multiple attempts, so they're reborn and reincarnated into new bodies. Though, through lucid dreaming and certain rituals, you can recall your past and vanquish certain evils in the world. However, in their teachings, the evils of this world would inevitably lead to an apocalypse, of course. So the men within the group were required to commit to military training. Though the actual date of this upcoming apocalypse was given, it then came and went, and has apparently been moved a few times. Some of the more nefarious nature of the cult lies in its denial of higher education to women within the cult, as well as its strict doctrine of corporal punishment for children. Additionally, the cult notoriously does not believe in homosexuality, instead telling its members that they are simply hungover from their time spent in a previous life within the Roman Empire. And speaking of past lives, if you have a disease or a cancer, then this is simply a reflection of your poor karma from a previous life. Too bad, so sad, that's your past self's fault, basically. Last thing before we leave the light. When reading about this group, a lot of the former members apparently say that their group, although it doesn't have a written text, it does use a lot of symbolism, and one of their primary symbols is an owl that watches over the light. And when I heard that, I couldn't help but think about this. Bohemian Grove. Could the Congregation for the Light actually be part of the secret society that's tied to a lot of the elites running the US and maybe the world? That's a line of thought for another video, sadly, but it's also something to ponder just the same. Railism. Railism is a UFO cult that was founded in France in the 1970s by Claude Vaurilhon. The Raelians believed that we were created through genetic experiments and advanced technologies by a species of alien named the Elohim. Claude claims to have been contacted by an Elohim spacecraft. Their leader, who said his name was Yahweh, told him that he was to be the aliens' ambassador to mankind. His mission was to create an embassy in Israel for the Elohim. And once that mission was complete, and the world had achieved peace, the Elohim would ride in and share their technology with us and usher in a new wave of prosperity to bolster that world peace. By the way, Yahweh and Elohim are Hebrew words for God and Lord, and they'll come in handy throughout this entire video, as well as here. But according to Claude, it makes sense for the Elohim to have that title for Yahweh because they've been to Earth many times throughout history, and it's often that these Elohim have been mistaken for gods, though they are not. Raelians believe that many of the religious figures such as Jesus, Buddha, or Muhammad were actually human-alien hybrids created when the Elohim has visited the Earth in the past and bred with human women. These prophets were created to usher in a new world peace, and Claude, who now goes by Rael, just so happens to be the fourth and final prophet of the Elohim. Some of their other strange beliefs lie in the idea that you can clone yourself as a form of reincarnation or immortality. Public nudity promotes free love and therefore world peace, which I think is objective because it depends on who's naked, but that's just me. But probably the weirdest thing I found when reading about this group is the size of the cult. The Raelians have over 18,000 members worldwide, and they're still going strong today. They're even giving lectures in high schools in South Korea, I guess, which is absolutely wild to me. Just in case you were curious, according to the Raelians, our future alien overlords are about 4 feet tall, have delicious olive skin, luscious long black hair, and big almond-shaped eyes that radiate a sense of peace and harmony. Conscious Development. Conscious Development was a Dallas-based cult created by Terry Hoffman in the late 1960s. Hoffman was a would-be guru of sorts that claimed to be the reincarnation of Saint Teresa of Avila, a Spanish nun and mystic of sorts who headed a reform in the 16th century that emphasized a simpler life based less in worldly ways and more in poverty and closeness to God through prayer. In contrast, Hoffman, on the other hand, seemed to enjoy materialism and money a great deal. Along with selling lessons and private meditation sessions, she sold jewelry which she claimed were powerful talismans against evil. Through her brand of mysticism, she gathered a following of around 100 people between Dallas and Chicago. To her followers, she claimed that there were ascendant masters, and her reincarnation and closeness to God had allowed her to commune and see these other masters, such as Jesus, who was all around but merely invisible to everyone else. She went on to claim that in these meetings with God, she had been instructed to wage a battle against the Black Lords, which were thought of as a spiritual foe, sort of like a negative energy force. Though in order to join Terry in the battle, you needed to join her inner circle and become a teacher alongside her. These teachers were 25 of her most devout members, who had been handpicked by Terry to give them a sense of closeness and loyalty to her. Money was also a big factor in those chosen. Showing loyalty often meant giving money to Hoffman in what she called wealth transfer rituals, which she claimed closer aligned followers with the ascended. Where this group falls on our list is due to some mysterious circumstances surrounding the group, where a dozen people ended up dead. 2 of these deaths were ex-husbands of Hoffman, and the rest were followers and ex-followers of conscious development. These deaths happened in the way of overdoses, murders, accidents, and one from cancer, according to Hoffman, though his body showed no signs of cancer during the coroner's report. To add more suspicion, every one of these deaths named Terry Hoffman as the beneficiary in their wills. The cult disbanded during the investigation into these murders, but despite all of the circumstantial evidence and common sense that pointed towards Terry, a Dallas DA found that there was insufficient critical evidence to secure a conviction on any of the deaths, and Hoffman was released with no charges being filed against her. However, she was sent to jail in 1994 for bankruptcy fraud, except for it was only 18 months. Lydias Cult. Lydias Cult, otherwise known as the Rosary Prayer Group, is in reference to a group located in Italy sometime between 1972 and 1988. This Catholic offshoot believed that their leaders, Lydia Naccarato and her uncle Antonio, were divine and capable of receiving messages or prophecy from God. When Lydia was 20, it was said that she had a vision. In this trance-like state, she drew a leaf. Within the leaf, there was a text which told her to find a leaf that looked identical to the drawn leaf. And if she did, she would bring about the second coming of God. Her uncle was a well-known devout Catholic and a man of God in the region, having completed missions to South America and doing work for the church in France. Lydia reported her vision to him, and the two began spreading the word to look for the leaf as well as other visions they received. When Uncle Antonio died, Lydia stated that her and her uncle had given themselves up to God and asked for all sins of the group to be removed, and in exchange, God could take one of them. He took Antonio, but Lydia then claimed that Antonio would return, and upon his return, Jesus would be coming back with him. She said that the date of this resurrection would happen on June 8, 1988. Lydia was paranoid at this point, and believed that there was a group of Satanists that would try and foil the return, so she gathered a group of 35 of her most trusted apostles to travel back to her small hometown in the Italian countryside. Once there, Lydia said that she had received a message from Antonio about what to do in preparation for his return, which included Lydia letting out her hair, placing her uncle's shoes next to his bed, as well as making sure all of the believers wore white on the day of to declare to the village and the world that there was an upcoming miracle. However, when that date came and went, Lydia began telling the group that she had received another vision. There was a traitor in their midst, who she had identified as one of her apostles. Lydia then claimed that God had told her they needed to kill this Judas in order to save themselves, as he had been overtaken by Satan. Her followers stripped and bound the man to a chair before her brother Salvatore and their cousin Santo shot and killed the apostle. During the shooting, they apparently accidentally shot and wounded another apostle who fled, fearing his life. That man went to the police, and when the police arrived, they found the ring of apostles all clad in white, exhaustedly chanting, "Hail Mary." In the middle of the followers sat the dead man who had been tied to a chair next to an altar covered with pictures of Uncle Antonio, the Sacred Heart of Jesus, and a dead cat. The group is said to have disbanded after this event. However, some sources say that there were still remnants of their believers through 2010. Speculation time. Small sidebar here. I got a lot of this while reading through a research paper conducted by a renowned Italian psychiatrist by the name of Mario Di Fiorino. Through reading the paper, he seems to struggle with what caused this cult to exist. He bounces back and forth between if Lydia herself was just psychotic, or if this was some sort of strange phenomenon of group psychosis. However, for my own take, what I took away from this research paper was probably a little bit more sad. It reads as though it's very possible that when Lydia's father passed away at the age of 10, her uncle Antonio came around more frequently, and although he may have just been looking to help Lydia and her family through the tragedy, it also kind of reads as though he may have been abusing her during this time. And the reason why I say that is because throughout the research document, when Mario is speaking with Lydia in the mental hospital, it seems like she has more than just a divine ideation of her uncle. In fact, later in the document, it seems that one of her visions discusses that when her uncle would return, he was supposed to greet her with a kiss. Kind of weird. Maybe I just kind of lost things in translation from Italian to English, but also maybe this is the case of a young girl who was abused regularly from a young age, who ended up idolizing her abuser, and then in some sort of Stockholm sort of situation became infatuated with him and helped him build a cult that worshipped him, essentially. I'm not excusing what she did in any way, but I found this case particularly interesting, and I just really wanted to point this out. Before heading into the deeper levels, I just want to take this time to express that we are going to get into some seriously disturbing topics. And so if you are not comfortable with viewing the extreme dark side of humanity, now is that time to maybe just hit the subscribe button and move on to the closing thoughts, and then catch me on the next video. Moving on. The Church of Yahweh. The Church of Yahweh sprang forth from Michael Ryan in the early 1980s. Ryan was an out-of-work truck driver who found meaning in the teachings of the Christian identity movement. The Christian identity movement is pretty much denounced by every other denomination of Christianity due to its racist and anti-Semitic views. They aren't exactly what we're here for, but seeing as the Church of Yahweh is an offshoot, just know that they ended up with the same hate-filled kind of views. Ryan resonated with the charismatic leader of the Christian Identity Church that he attended, and soon placed himself as the leader's right-hand man. However, after he discovered the means in which to attract and captivate his own orbiters, he split from the group to create the Church of Yahweh, which is ironic because Yahweh is Hebrew, and as I said, the group is extremely anti-Semitic, but I digress. Ryan was offered a place to house his congregation by one of his followers, a widower by the name of Rick Stice, who owned a pig farm in the small town of Rulo, Nebraska. The group settled themselves on Stice's land and eventually ended up with around 25 members at their peak. In addition to the anti-government and racist propaganda of the Christian identity movement, Ryan also preached an impending apocalypse, which he knew of because he claimed to be speaking directly with God. This Armageddon would come in the form of a race war, and so the group began stockpiling weapons and ammo for the battle to come. At times, Ryan even claimed himself to be the Archangel Gabriel, who is said to be the commander of God's armies against Satan. During this time, Ryan also claimed to be the king. That meant that he needed to take queens, and he ended up marrying at least 4 women from the group. Problems really started with the group when Rick Stice and another member by the name of James Thim started to question the validity of some of Ryan's teachings. Because of this, the men were both made to be slaves and do manual labor, sleep outside, and eventually this culminated in Ryan and the other members forcing the 2 men to perform unspeakable acts on farm animals as well as each other. Still, this punishment wasn't enough for Ryan, and so he took his fury to Rick Stice's son, Luke, who was only 5. He verbally and physically beat the boy until eventually, on March 25th, 1985, he threw him against a cabinet so hard that Luke died from a head injury. After the death of his son, Rick Stice fled the group. After this, Ryan turned his fury back towards James Thim, who he brutally tortured for several days. During that time, Ryan had other members of the cult whip Thim a total of 75 times. They beat him repeatedly, shot off each of his fingertips, broke his legs, partially skinned him, and did things to him with farm tools, all before Ryan finally stomped on his chest until he died. The only reason why this cult was taken down was actually because a few of the members of the Church of Yahweh were arrested for stealing farm equipment, and upon interrogation, they confessed to what had happened to James Thim. The police then raided the farm and they uncovered a cache of $250,000 worth of stolen farm equipment, 150,000 rounds of ammunition, and hundreds of firearms. They then arrested Ryan and many other members of the group, and they disbanded. Michael Ryan was convicted for the murders and was sentenced to death. However, he vowed to rewrite the Bible while he was in prison, though he ended up dying on death row of cancer. The True Russian Orthodox Church. The True Russian Orthodox Church was formed in the vacuum that was created in the fall of the Soviet Union in the 90s. Due to the fact that the Soviet state had forced atheism for so long, the people of Eastern Europe were now primed and eager for religion. Enter Pyotr Kuznetsov, who was an architect in his 40s. He found his life to be empty and searched for something to believe in, and he found it within the Russian Orthodox Church. Just the Russian Orthodox Church, not the True Russian Orthodox Church. That'll be what he creates after anyway. However, after reading through the Bible, he found that the Russian Orthodox Church was lacking. It was not strictly adhering to the Word of God as Pyotr saw things. It was too relaxed. And so he took to a mission. Printing out pamphlets for his new beliefs, he traveled from Russia to Belarus and back, distributing his teachings and growing a following. This was the founding of the true Russian Orthodox Church, where he preached that there needed to be a return to a stricter adherence to biblical standards. This meant a rejection of modern technology such as TV, radio, even barcodes and modern medicine, as well as social security numbers and other means of being tracked by the government. His followers were not allowed to socialize with worldly people who partook in modern ways of living. They couldn't even use or handle money under Pyotr's orders. It was a complete return to rural living and maintaining an off-the-grid lifestyle. During this time, Pyotr began having visions of a coming apocalypse. He convinced his following of 40 to 50 that God was upset about the advanced state of corruption within modern society and the church, which he claimed was all due to the influence of Satan. He prophesied that on May 28, 2008, the world would end in a cataclysmic event, so he ordered that his followers prepare for that day by stockpiling supplies. At some point during these preparations, one of his followers had their own vision of the apocalypse, in which he said they were meant to construct a bunker to safeguard the group. Unlike the other leaders on this list, Pyotr did not see this as a loss of control that others were having visions. He leaned into this and ordered the group to begin construction of the bunker, which in the end amounted to a dugout cave of sorts, complete with a small chapel, kitchen, toilet right next to the kitchen, gross, and a communal living area for the group to live in. By October of 2007, the group had completed construction of the bunker, and they began stockpiling food, water, and a few weapons, along with kerosene to feed their lamps within the cave. In November of 2007, the daughter of one of his followers alerted the authorities of the group's intentions to move into the cave. Pyotr was brought in for questioning. 29 to 35 members of the group believed that this was just another step towards the moral decay of society, and so they entered the cave to begin their final stay for doomsday. Authorities went to check in on the group, and that's when they discovered that the majority of the members had fled to the cave already. Upon this realization, this is when they began attempting to convince them to come out. What ended up taking place was an almost 6-month standoff between the Russian authorities and the cult. They refused to come out and even threatened mass suicide by way of the large stockpile of kerosene. Not knowing what to do, the authorities brought priests in from the Russian Orthodox Church to try and convince the cult, by way of talking to them through a small metal chimney that the group had made for air. But that didn't work because the members strongly believed that all outsiders were corrupt, and the members of the mainstream church most of all. So when that didn't work, they brought out Pyotr himself, who tried to reason with his followers. However, they noticed that it looked like he had been beaten, and obviously been made to tell them to come out. So believing that it was a better fate, they even attempted to shoot up through that air vent to kill Pyotr. They saw this as the final corruption of what they held truest. Their leader had been martyred in a way, solidifying their beliefs that they held against outsiders, and the end of all things was certainly coming soon. However, as time went on, the snows began to thaw, and there were other fears by the outsiders. There was a possibility that the cave would collapse due to the ice melt and runoff. On March 28th of 2008, 7 women from the group willingly left the cave. 3 days later, 14 members came out. On May 16th, the last 9 members of the cult emerged from the cave. They had left 12 days before the prophesied apocalypse due to toxic fumes from the decaying bodies of 2 members who had died during their stay in the cave. After this, May 28th came and went, and the group mostly disbanded. Pyotr, on the other hand, was committed and was found to have paranoid schizophrenia. Odang Trading Co. Odang Trading Co. is in reference to a very small offshoot of the cult known as the Evangelical Baptist Church of Korea. This group was led by 48-year-old Park Soon-ja, a South Korean businesswoman who owned and operated a furniture and crafts business. Not much is known about what her actual practices or beliefs were. However, what we do know is that she had indoctrinated her employees as her followers, and they for whatever reason believed that she had the ability to foretell an upcoming apocalypse. Sadly, due to this prophecy, on August 29, 1987, 32 members, including Soon-ja, were found dead within the Odang Trading Company. Some of the strange things around this cult are due to not only the size of the mass delete, but also how it was performed. When authorities entered, they found that most of the group was located within the attic. They were bound, gagged, and had ingested an unknown drug of some sort. However, they had all been strangled to death on top of these things, except for one man who was hanging from the rafters of the building. They found notes from the followers which indicated that they had known that they were going to die and willingly participated. So basically, they all agreed that they would ingest a poison and then tie each other up and let one man strangle them all, one at a time, before hanging himself. This all becomes more chilling when you read that in the days and weeks leading up to the tragedy, many creditors had come to Soon-ja demanding that she repay debts, and that she had had her followers chase them out or even try and beat them up. Further digging will tell you that she had racked up over $8.7 million in debt across 220 investors and creditors, many of which were actually family members of her followers and employees. So in pulling back, Soon-Ja must have been playing spiritual leader to line her pockets. And when the world started crashing down around her and she realized that she wouldn't be able to keep things up, she predicted a doomsday and then took the lives of 31 other people, all because she couldn't let go of that power or money and pay the piper. It's just sad. Superior Universal Alignment. Superior Universal Alignment is a Brazilian UFO cult founded in 1981 by one Valentina de Andre in São Paulo that grew to about 1,000 members at their peak. Valentina was a former teacher that claimed to channel alien beings who told her that extraterrestrials had created mankind and that Jesus was an alien messiah who had come to teach peace and love, but he was not God, and according to her, there was no God. She began massing followers and told them that aliens had told her that there would be an upcoming apocalypse caused by ecological collapse. But before that end, the aliens would be coming to collect Valentina and her followers to whisk them away to a paradise planet. And although this group doesn't end in a mass death of cult members, what they do end up doing is possibly more tragic. What places this entry firmly within the depths of this depression tier lies within one of their other teachings. Valentina and her followers believed that all male children born after the year 1981 were the embodiment of evil, and the only way to pay back the kindness of the aliens who were coming back to pick her and her followers up and save them from certain doom was to exterminate these children. Which, whoa, right? Talk about a far cry from eco-friendly aliens who promote peace. Anyways, I'm just really stalling because as bad as the rest has been, I'm really avoiding this next part. Just in case you don't see where this is headed, this next segment covers vicious crimes against kids that I wish I could bleach from my memory. But if you're continuing from here it is. From 1989 to 1993, young boys in rural Brazil began to disappear. In total, there were 19 boys who went missing, none older than 15. Some of the boys were burned, and others had their eyes gouged out. However, all of the boys were castrated with what doctors called a medical precision, and they had all been essayed before being left to die in the jungle. Only 6 bodies were found, and another 5 boys managed to live through the ordeal. After being left for dead, they managed to walk out of the jungle and find their way home. The other 8 boys were never recovered and assumed dead. In 2003, the Brazilian DA was able to prosecute several members of the Universal Alignment cult, including 2 doctors, a businessman, and a member of the local police, as well as Valentina. All 4 men were convicted and sentenced to prison terms ranging from 35 to 77 years. Valentina, however, was acquitted after botched evidence collection and poor presentation to the jury. She continued on preaching her message, however, she significantly dropped out of the view of the public eye. And in 2025, she would be approximately 94, so by now, she may well be dead for all we know. But good riddance. The Chicago Rippers. The Chicago Rippers, or the Ripper Crew, is an extremely small cult. More like a satanic cult gang, but an extremely violent one nonetheless. The group was made up of 4 men, Thomas Cocorales and his brother Andrew Cocorales, Edward Spritzer, and Robin Geck, who was the leader of the group. It appears that their foundation and the reason for them all to come together was originally solely based in criminal activity. However, Robin, who was said to be the extremely charismatic leader, convinced the men to amp things up. In May of 1981, using a van, the 4 men pulled up to a 28-year-old Linda Sutton. They abducted her. They tortured, essayed her, mutilated, and killed her. Sadly, this would not be their last victim. Between May of 1981 and October 6 of 1982, the group killed 17 women as well as 1 man, though that was more of a road rage / drive-by shooting by Geck. What places them here in the depths of our list is not just the group's murders and assaults, but what they did after those murders. During their crimes, when I mentioned that they mutilated their female victims, what they did was remove their breasts using a piano wire, often while they were alive. Police wouldn't discover why this was done until December 6, 1982, when a 20-year-old prostitute by the name of Beverly Washington escaped the group. She had been abducted, essayed, stabbed 30 times, and had her left breast removed, but once free, she ran for help and told the police a description of the distinct reddish-orange van that the Rippers were using, as well as a description of Robin Geck, who she had had a run-in with before. Robin was arrested, and while the police began interrogating him, they also searched his home. Within the attic of his house, the police discovered a candlelit altar covered with a red cloth, 6 upside-down crosses, and many of the group's trophies. His known associates were brought in, and Spreitzer confessed to everything and implicated the rest of the group. Through their interrogations, it was gleaned that this attic altar was what they called their satanic chapel, where the group performed what they called ritual sacrifices from those they had killed. These rituals were completed with chanting and even cannibalism of the trophies according to the confessions of Spreitzer and Thomas. In the end, all 4 men went to jail. Edward Spreitzer received the death penalty, but was eventually commuted to life without parole. Andrew Kokorellis was executed in 1999, and Thomas Kokorellis was sentenced to 70 years due to a plea deal and his cooperation. However, in 2019, he was actually released on good behavior. Can you believe that? Their ringleader Robin Geck received 120 years. He refused to confess to any wrongdoing all the way through, and somehow there was not enough significant evidence from the other murders to place him at the scenes apparently. But this absolute legend of a judge hit him with everything that he could from the case of Beverly Washington. And in the end, the judge had this to say about Robin. Only the devil would do these things. An animal would not do these things. A monster would. Before we continue, I would not be doing this case any justice if I didn't mention one other thing here. Even though it's not confirmed, I have to say this. It's mentioned in just about every single article that you will read on this group. Robin Geck apparently worked for PDM contractors in the late 1970s, hired on by none other than John Wayne Gacy, meaning that the two may have known each other, and it's even possible that some part of their interaction may have shaped Geck in some sort of way. To close the Ripper crew, one of the detectives on the case had this to say when talking about Geck. He made Manson look like a Boy Scout. The Order of the Solar Temple. The Order of the Solar Temple begins in the early 1980s with Luc Jouret, who was a successful smooth-talking Belgian doctor. He and his buddy Joseph D. Mambro had both been ousted from another Templar cult by the name of the Renewed Order of the Temple because they were getting a little too power-hungry for that group's liking. In 1984, they decided to create their own group, which they named the Order of the Solar Temple. Joseph became the cult's director and treasurer, while Luke was known as the frontman for the order and began recruiting new members, focusing on a very specific group of people. Normally, when you think of who is in a cult, you think of the poor, down on their luck, looking to find purpose, or possibly weak-minded individuals who are easily persuaded or manipulated. The members of the Order of the Solar Temple, however, were the opposite, as they targeted middle-aged, successful professionals, at times people who were very well-to-do, the elite, if you will. With this following, Luke and Joseph began forming a very unique New Age group, one that seemed to mix Neo-Templarism, UFOs, Theosophy, and as we will come to find out, a doomsday cult. Though even today we do not know everything about their beliefs, due to the fact that a lot of their teachings were tied up in a hierarchical order of sorts. Even as a new member, you were kept in the dark. In order to learn more about the group, you needed to ascend through the ranks, and in doing so, would then be entrusted with more and more secrets, which as we will find out, a lot of those secrets, the leaders ended up taking to the grave. However, for now, so far as we know, here are some of the beliefs of the Order of the Solar Temple. They believed that there were ascended masters, or spiritual beings, who called the star Sirius their home. These spiritual beings had reached a state of perfection that would allow them to transition between planes of existence. Ascended masters were helping to guide humanity's evolution and existed on a higher dimensional plane. But if you were faithful to them and their teachings, they would help guide you to be reborn in purity. Framing of these beliefs allowed Luke to claim that he was the resurrection of a revered Templar knight by the name of Bernard Clairvaux, who helped shape the original order of the Knights Templar. Some of the group's other strange beliefs were in cosmic marriages, where members of the group who were married were often made to swap partners with each other, oftentimes against their will, as the leaders claimed that it rebalanced love. Sometimes there were even large age gaps between the people that they split and their new intended marriage partner. A lot of what the group believed and practiced relied heavily on rituals. They believed that in performing rites and rituals correctly, you could achieve a mystical mood, which really opened you up beyond human limitation. But two of their most important beliefs were in transit. Transit was the soul leaving the mortal body to venture forth to Sirius, or as we all see it, death. And death was a good thing to the order because it meant ascension. And two, the apocalypse, of course. According to the Order of the Solar Temple, we were moving into the Age of Aquarius, and the Earth would soon be consumed. With this message of doom, and of a plan for a hopeful salvation from ascended masters, the group reached its peak membership in January of 1989 with 442 followers worldwide, mostly in France, Switzerland, and Canada. What's interesting here is that a lot of the members and the smaller offshoots did not even know about the leaders or the true workings of the group due to the hierarchy that I talked about earlier. So members and new initiates gave money to causes that they knew nothing about. And give they did. Wealthy members of the group gave millions of dollars to Luke and Joseph, who misused the money, and the group began having financial troubles, among other things. There were arrests in Canada over some silencers which had been purchased, and once the media found out, they had a field day finding out that there was a doomsday cult that was gathering weaponry. In addition to that, inside the cult, things weren't much better, as some of the members began to question some of the rituals, even learning that some of the mystical apparitions were faked by other members. There was a letter that was circulated around the membership that declared that Joseph and Luke had embezzled money from the group, and to finish off their troubles, one of their members had been forbidden from having a child within the group, and so she had left. And she had subsequently had a baby boy, who Joseph said was most certainly the Antichrist. He was so upset about this defiance that he ordered the ex-member and her family killed. In 1994, all of these tensions came to a head, starting with that ex-member and her family, who were tricked into coming to Joseph's home in Switzerland before being brutally murdered, and the members who committed the murder then burned the house down around themselves a couple days later. However, sadly, this was only the beginning of the Solar Temple's plan. From then, there was a series of events that took place. The leaders then drugged, shot, suffocated, and otherwise murdered large groups of their members before killing themselves. 53 members of the Order of the Solar Temple, including Luc Jouret and Joseph de Membro, died that year. In the wake of that destruction, they left even more problems. Before the group committed to this plan, they attempted to set fire to all documents and computers, looking to bury any and all correspondence between the group. Previous to enacting the plan, they wrote manifestos and leaned into their doctrines, proclaiming that they had all willingly gone to transit to Sirius. This left other members to believe that they had somehow missed their opportunity to join the Ascended Masters. In 1995, 14 members, including 3 kids, took sleeping pills and arranged themselves in a star pattern before one of the members went around and shot everyone in the head, before then pouring gasoline over them all and himself and lighting the blaze. In 1997, 5 members of the Order burned their house down with themselves inside. In total, the Order of the Solar Temple took the lives of 74 people from 1994 to 1997. The Movement for the Restoration of the Ten Commandments of God. The Movement for the Restoration of the Ten Commandments of God is a Ugandan cult that was formed around 1989 by Joseph Kibwati when he came in contact with a former bartender and prostitute by the name of Credonia Murwendi. Credonia claimed to have reoccurring visions of the Virgin Mary that communicated messages from God to her, and soon enough Joseph claimed to have the same. The two both stated that their message from God was one of frustration and anger, that the word of God was not being strictly followed. The Ten Commandments in particular had been completely cast aside in a society where Satan had successfully corrupted even the modern church, causing its grasp on the importance of strictly following God's word to slip. Together, they began the Movement for the Restoration of the Ten Commandments of God, a group whose teachings do not stray that far from mainstream Catholicism. This surface level of similar beliefs and Joseph's charisma allowed him to convince followers that he was receiving word directly from God, and this ballooned their numbers to roughly 5,000 members in 1997. However, they were not completely in line with the Catholic Church. In fact, throughout the cult's teachings, they condemned the Catholic Church for its liberalism with the Word of God. And eventually, many members who were actually Catholic priests or nuns were excommunicated by the Catholic Church for their views, which only stoked the fire of the movement and their cries of corruption. Other things that differed stemmed from their strict adherence to the commandments. They believed that in order to not break the commandment of "Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor," they should avoid talking at all. Within their compounds, their members remained mostly silent or communicated through sign language. They also had strict rules against sex outside of procreation, and discouraged modern medicine as doctors were known as witch doctors, peddling for Satan. They believed that illnesses such as the AIDS epidemic of the time was caused by sin, and in order to cure the sickness, you would need to cure the sin, not the body. They were continuously fasting, only allowed to eat 1 meal a day on Fridays and Mondays, and depending on their level of initiation in the group, they were required to wear different clothes to signify their status. Novices wore white robes, those who had sworn to follow the commandments wore green, and the fully professed members wore green and white. In order to become a member in the group, followers were required to read Joseph's 163-page document titled A Timely Message from Heaven, the End of the Present Time, which detailed out the group's beliefs as well as Joseph's biggest revelation. In the document, Joseph prophesied that at the end of the year 1999, there would be no year 2000. Instead, there would be a cataclysm that would end the world and start over from year 1. From the ashes of the apocalypse would come God's chosen, those who had listened, the followers of the movement of the restoration of the 10 Commandments of God, and they would reshape the world. Many members were required to give up their land, crops, savings, everything they had to the movement in order to aid the preparation for the doomsday, mainly a large compound with a new church, which they titled the Ark, which would shelter them from the end. However, as 2000 grew near, members started to get uneasy, and when the year 2000 rolled in and nothing happened, a lot of the members left, but others got upset. Joseph began to backpedal, explaining that Mary would be coming to take members to heaven on March 17th of 2000 instead. Still, some outraged members demanded their money and property back, and those members promptly went missing. From there, the group's devout continued on waiting for the new end date of March 17th. When the time came, the leaders of the cult ushered a congregation of over 300 people into the new church, before boarding up the windows and doors, nailing them shut, and lighting the building on fire. When police investigated the scene, it was discovered that the church was not the only crime scene, however. Within the compound and surrounding areas, the police found multiple fresh, mass graves that had been dug with hundreds of more bodies. These bodies were littered with stab wounds and other signs of violence. These were the other members who had attempted to get back their property or otherwise upset the leaders in some way. In the end, depending on which source you read, the total body count from this heinous murder-suicide was between 780 and over 1,000 people. This makes it either the largest loss of life caused by a cult, or the second, depending on which source you believe, with the Jonestown Massacre totaling at 918. The bodies of Joseph and Credonia were never found, and after the event, there were many sightings of them. I read one article which stated that there was a witness that swore that they saw the two fleeing from the church right after lighting the fire. With that being said, they've never been caught or brought to justice for killing hundreds of their followers. And on that chilling and depressing note, this is where our iceberg ends. Well, that was rough. If you're still here, then thank you so much for being here. Hopefully you found this video interesting. It took me countless hours of researching and scouring through research documents, which is actually really weird to me because when I've done other, deep dives on stuff myself before starting to make YouTube content, I didn't realize how many research papers there were where people have deep dived this and actual medical professionals have gone in and evaluated members of these groups, which is where I got a decent chunk of the information for some of these more obscure cults. But yeah, hopefully I made this information digestible and still informational, and you found it interesting, and you enjoyed it. Please let me know in the comments what you thought, and which one of these groups you maybe thought was the most interesting. I am super exhausted. It's like 2 o'clock in the morning right now, and I've spent many late nights, writing this up. So I'm gonna head to bed, and hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Until then, please, if you're still here and you want to see more of this, hit the subscribe button. It is free, and like this video, and maybe share it with a friend, and go follow me on X or Twitter or whatever you kids are calling it these days. Thank you. Bye.